Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this simple Ajax application, which allows you to make posts like so. And you can see that this all happens without a page refresh. You can also log in. And then the post that you make will be made under your name. Okay, so let's jump straight into the code then. And the page is called index.php, as it usually is. And down here we've got some minimal HTML. This is for the form that you fill out, the title, the body, and it's kept in line with tables. There's also an error div, a success div, which are there just to receive messages, and the post wrap, which is actually the div that contains all the posts. The majority of the functionality of this application is handled by the JavaScript, and we use JQuery here because it's a lot nicer than using bare JavaScript. So JQuery is a great library, and it makes a lot of things very, very easy. Creating Ajax requests is now a lot easier than it was. It handles all the browser compatibility behind the scenes, which is fantastic. So the first function that's executed when you go onto the page is the one that retrieves all the results from the database and renders them. And as you can see, it's pretty minimal code here, pretty basic. So what we do is initiate an Ajax call. Once the page is loaded, if you pass into the default JQuery object, which you do by referencing with a $, and you pass in a function, it will execute that function once the page is fully loaded. So it's basically equivalent to saying window.onload. Inside, we initiate the Ajax call of the type post. You could use get, but this is safer. And we send the data to forumscript.php, which we're going to look at in a second. We pass in only one parameter here. If you need to know anything about these parameters, you can Google post parameters or get parameters or something of that nature. It's basically just a method of sending data to the server. So here it says get all equals true, and that's passed in as part of the URL behind the scenes. And that's simply a flag telling the server-side script which function to execute. So let's jump straight into the server side and see what's going on. So we look through and we find our getAll flag that was passed in. It said if the post variable getAll is set, then execute this code. It's pretty simple code. We start with a basic SQL query that says select everything from the table CMS posts and order them by ID in descending order. We pass that into the basic PHP MySQL query function, and we store the result from that query in the allPost variable. Then we pass that variable to the renderPost function, which I've created down here, and you'll see this function is used a couple of times, also up here when we insert a post. So let's have a look at how that works. It takes this one argument, query, which we see passed in here and here. First thing we do is initialize the return variable, and then we begin looping through the results with the while loop. We use the MySQL fetch associative array function, and we store it temporarily in the row. In this case, each row is basically an individual post. We take the user ID from that row, we store it in the user ID variable, and then to actually get the user as a variable, we have to execute another little bit of SQL. So we say here, select everything from the table users, where the user ID is equal to user ID that we got here. And then we stored that in the user variable. In this line we use the ternary operator, and it's simply saying if the user ID is greater than 0, then they are a real user, and we retrieve the value from here. If it's not greater than 0, then it's a guest, and the username is simply guest. After that, we start to create the HTML that's going to be sent back to the client. We store that in the return variable. And first off, we create a div with a class of post, an ID corresponding to the ID that we retrieved from the database. We output the title, the username, and the date, which we decrease the size of the font slightly on. We then put the body in, and we create a delete button at the bottom. And for the delete button, we have an on-click function called del. So we're saying when we click this delete button, trigger the del function and pass in a reference to this button. We'll look a bit more at that in a second. When the HTML is returned to the client, we say on success, R is a reference to the data that we received, and we say get the element with an ID of post wrap and change the HTML inside it to the results. If there's any errors, we report that as well. We say get the error element, change the text inside it to could not retrieve posts. It's mainly for debugging purposes, and then some animations on that. The next function we're going to look at is the function for adding new posts. Again, we start with the JQuery default object and we pass in a function to be executed on body load. And we use the JQuery selectors, which are basically the same as CSS selectors, to say get the element with an ID of title and store a reference to it in this variable here. We do the same for body and the same for error and post wrap. Now we get the form, which has an ID of add, and we say on submit execute this function. And the first thing we do here is a little bit of JavaScript form validation that says if the title is equal to an empty string or the body, then we output the error text. The post must have both a title and a body. And then we return false to cancel the default behavior. If there's no problems, we initiate another Ajax call of type post. The same script again, only this time we pass in the variable title, which is equal to title, description, or body even, and we set the flag add to true so we know which function to trigger again. We construct the post parameters by saying title is equal to, and then we reference the title element that we did up here, get the value from it, and the same for description. Then we add a flag that's saying add equals true, again just to tell us which function to execute on the server side. So let's go over and have a look at that again. We find the add function here. We pick out the title from the post variable that was passed in, same for description, and we store them in these variables here. We also say, using another ternary operator here, if there is a session variable open with the user ID, then we retrieve that and put it in this variable here. If not, we set the user ID to 0, which is basically setting the user as a guest. This is where we insert the post into the database. We say insert into CMS post table with the values null, because that's the ID and that's auto incremented, the user ID, the title, the body, and a timestamp, which gives us the time and the date. If there's any problems, we say or die with the MySQL error. After that, we pull the post back out of the database, and the only reason we didn't reuse it is because we needed to get the ID that it was given by being put into the database. So we say select everything from the CMS post table, order by ID in descending order again, and we say limit 1, which means that we only pick off the top row in the database, which in this case was the last post that we put in. Again, we render that post. So we loop over the only row that went in, and we echo the return back to the client side. When that comes back, we say on success, pass in the return variable, and prepend it to the post wrap div. Instantly, we hide that, and we show it over a period of 300 milliseconds, which gives us that sliding in animation there. We also set the success text, just a little message to say post added, which you can also see here. Again, we return false to cancel the basic form behavior that we're trying to refresh the page.